Wedding photographers, what are some red flags that a couple will not last? Wedding photographer here. I've been shooting for a while with a famous studio here in Singapore. Sometimes the red flags don't necessarily lead to a breakup. You'll be surprised at how durable relationships are and how much compromise and forgiveness go through a marriage. Anyway, here are the usual red flags in my experience. The bridezillas and groomzillas. I avoid these people from the start because it means trouble for vendors like us. Their demands show their personality. Often, these demanding attitudes are a major downfall in relationships and marriages. When the couple argues in front of you, I've seen it happen a lot. I even had a couple who looked like they just had a really big fight before meeting me. If the couple refuses to pay, if you're going to be an a-hole to vendors, there's no way you won't be an a-hole to your partner at some point, because money is a big issue, and it often means it will become an issue to either of you down the road. When I see the couple encounter a massive screw-up, how they react is the deal breaker for me. I've seen the lights go out at the banquet hall for a good 30 minutes and the guests were already kind of freaking out, but the bride and groom stayed chill. I instantly knew they were going to last. If they could be cool through this stressful big day in their lives, they'd be cool when rocky stuff happens. Ex-wedding photographer here. Typically, I saw red flags when the bride or groom is super quiet. And I mean really silent. Just watching. One instance was a groom who barely said 10 words to anyone during the ceremony or reception afterward. The bride and her mother were extremely loud and excited the entire time. I dropped off the photo bundle with them 2 weeks later and he was still quiet. She, however, complained about all of the pictures because the groom wasn't smiling enough. She wanted a discount because I couldn't make him look happy. They got divorced about a year later. I know this because I did his engagement photos with his new fiancée about 4 years after his first wedding. His engagement photos showed him much happier. Wedding videographer here. A couple flew my team out to Iceland for their engagement shoot. The first couple of days were fine and everything looked okay, but in Iceland, some lodging options aren't very luxurious. The groom chose to book what was essentially a tiny bunkhouse, the ones meant for summer camps, and the bride lost it and complained the whole night. The next morning, things were pretty tense, but we continued with the shoot as planned, even though it is now incredibly awkward. Most of our plans fall through because they start arguing in front of a beautiful solitary glacier for 2 hours. Our team can hear them yelling at each other half a mile away because there is literally no one else around for miles. We finished up whatever we could on the last day of the shoot and awkwardly said our goodbyes. Later, I learned that they broke up a month before the wedding. Early in my career, I filmed wedding videos. The interviews always give it away. By the end of the wedding, I usually have a pretty good idea of who's going to last and who won't, and I've proven it over the years. I asked one groom in a recorded interview why he asked her to marry him, and he said, "The pressure to get married." They lasted less than 2 months. I hadn't even finished the video and their marriage was already over. There's something about the way couples look at each other when they're together and then talk about each other when they're away from each other. Some examples I've personally seen are when the husband can't describe his wife with anything other than, "she's beautiful." They got divorced. When one of the two doesn't want to have cake smashed in their face, but the other one does it anyway. Yep, divorced. When one gets really drunk at the wedding and the other one does not. Divorced. Happened to 2 couples I worked with. I'm not a photographer, but I used to work at a David's bridal. One bride came in with her friends. We did the say yes to the dress thing, and an hour later she's standing there with $3,000 worth of stuff, but doesn't have any money with her. She decides she wants to apply for a store credit card, so I run it through the system. She gets denied. She then calls the groom for his info, but he tells her no. Suddenly, she threw a huge fit on the phone with him while standing on the bridal stage, literally demanding, "Why not? Why? Like an actual child. I've never seen a 30-year-old age backwards so quickly. She was literally stomping her feet in front of me, all her friends, and the other brides in the store. I was so embarrassed for her. Eventually, she hangs up on him, and her friend is like, "I'm so sorry you can't get your dress." And the bride instantly stops crying and just goes, "Oh, I will get the dress. I just have to do this at home, and when he gets mad enough, he'll come get it for me, so I'll stop." Sure enough, the bride came back 2 days later with the groom, and he applied for the credit card and bought the dress. He was livid but silent, and she was smug as hell. Can't imagine they're having a happy marriage if they are still together. I'm a wedding videographer. I try to get to know both people beforehand so I can work in their hobbies or unique traits in my product. A big red flag is when one person is clearly trying to change the other. I had one dude who loved poker, craft beer, cigars, video games, and hanging with his rowdy friends. I planned a cool shoot where I had all his friends in an Old West-style saloon. But she steps in and declares, "Oh, he won't be doing any of those things anymore." Poor bastard just sat there in silence as I awkwardly had to plan them shopping for a Yorkie puppy instead. Halfway through post-production after the wedding, he called and said he was getting an annulment. I wanted to say, "Could have told you so," but I try to stay neutral. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Longtime wedding photographer here. I've been in the business long enough to have seen a few of my clients get divorced, so yes, I kind of have a sixth sense for these things. One common red flag is the groom's attitude toward the whole wedding. If he's all just about getting plastered with his buddies, that's a huge red flag. However, even some of the ones who I thought were really sweet and into each other still ended in divorce. I think with some people you can never tell, but with others, it is painfully obvious that their marriage is a train wreck from the beginning. The wedding where the bride's dad brought a shotgun to the wedding ended in divorce. If either of the couple looks down on the other, they're pretty much doomed. I think another red flag is if the bride constantly went back to her parents to consult or complain about issues that pop up instead of talking it out with her groom. It's possible that couples who do this can change, but it has always been a red flag if either of them is too attached to mom and dad fixing their problems, rather than working on it with each other. Some other red flags I notice: have kids together before marriage, divorced, vastly incompatible religious views, divorced, most military weddings I've shot, divorced, second or third marriages, divorced, married young, surprisingly not as big a factor as you'd think. Many are still together. Not a photographer, but I taught hundreds of couples their first wedding dance. After working one-on-one with them for months, I know which marriages would thrive and which couples would crash and burn, and by what year into the marriage too. There are couples who, when learning together a new skill, regardless of talent towards that new skill, complement each other when one of them achieves something. Those couples are going to make it in life. Couples who pass the blame onto the other one when challenged always put my divorce spidey senses up. Couples who love to argue and bicker like it's a sport, however, are also going to make it together in life because some people just totally get off on it. And you can tell when you ask them mid-argument if everything is going okay, and they instantly smile, and usually the non-dominant partner says something like, "Oh yes, we are fine, sorry." Then there are couples who are way too different from one another, but it's crystal clear that they love each other. They will make it until the kids leave, then it'll just be them, and they divorce. Lastly, some couples don't even look each other in the eye or have trouble with maintaining eye contact for more than 5 seconds. I give those couples 5 years tops. I'm a boudoir photographer. If you didn't know, boudoir albums are a popular gift from brides to grooms. The experience and photos are typically a huge ego boost for the bride and a cherished bonus for the groom. Typically, we have a professional hairstylist and makeup artist on site to glam up the bride. Most clients bring a friend, and we encourage this for their comfort. Happy people make the best photos after all. However, if the bride spends the bulk of the time complaining to their friend about the groom's opinions and behavior, the relationship tends to fizzle out before the wedding. Worse, the bride spends most of the time upset, texting her groom, or having arguments over the phone because he doesn't like the idea of someone else seeing her in her underwear and is sabotaging the shoot from afar. If a bride has ugly cried during a boudoir shoot arguing with her husband-to-be 9 times out of 10, that marriage doesn't happen. I have a horror story with a groom who is a jealous, possessive, controlling a-hole who tried to run the photo shoot. This guy came in and started choosing the bride's clothing, argued with the hairstylist, and added his own tips to every pose I set up. He spent more time criticizing her than actually being helpful. He was sitting on the far side of the room, out of frame, and yelling his suggestions at her the entire time. Early on, I thought they just enjoyed playfully insulting each other, but this guy took it way too far. He said things like, "Put your ass down, you look like a porn star," and, I kid you not, he commanded the bride to raise her face because he can see her double chin. We finally had to stop the shoot early when he physically tried to get the camera away from me. I stepped off to the side of the studio and asked the stylist to help the client get dressed. She was in tears. The a-hole stepped out for a smoke while she got packed, and the bride, crying, apologized profusely for bringing him. She told me they had arguments leading up to the photo shoot and he insisted on coming. She agreed and decided then that their future hinged on his behavior, and he totally blew it. As others have pointed out, you can tell a whole lot about a relationship by how they interact with each other. Thankfully, horror stories are rare. Wedding videographer here. I don't usually follow the marriage all that closely after the video is delivered, but usually you have a feeling as a neutral third party about whether it's going to last or not. While I agree with most of the stuff mentioned here, I've found that the microcosm of how the couple feels about each other usually comes out during the cake cutting. If they're drinking, then they've usually had a few by that point, and it's a moment when everyone is watching you do something potentially awkward with your new spouse. When I see a new bride or groom aggressively smush cake into the other's face, it's usually a strong sign of an unbalanced relationship. Sometimes they're both having fun with it and you can tell it's cool, but most of the time you can tell that the person with cake on their face is either shocked or angry about it. Again, I don't have hard data to track results, but that's the thing that usually informs my opinion about how it's going to work out. Not a wedding photographer, but I'm a cake artist. I had a couple come in for a tasting. The appointment was for 7 p.m., but he was late. The first half hour was just her. She told me they met at a stable where they both kept their horses. Those horses were going to be featured at the wedding as the bride and groom would ride them to the site, a beautiful farm venue. She described in detail her self-designed medieval gown, flower wreath in her hair, and embroidered shoes. It all sounded lovely. She wanted a cake like a castle, which was a specialty of mine. The whole wedding would be over the top, but not in a cringy way. Then he arrives. He barely says hi to her, sits down, and starts telling me about his wedding. He'll ride in dressed as a riverboat gambler with a frock coat, brocade vest, big hat, gold pocket watch, and sterling silver spurs. He's fine with the castle cake, but wants to incorporate the watch and pistols. I had already decided that I was not going to work with them. There is no way I could come up with a cake that would work for them. But they were there, so I brought out some samples. For the next hour, they carried on 2 entirely separate monologues. They didn't address each other, or me, and they didn't listen to each other, or me. I made no attempt to book them that night, and when they called later in the week, I told them their date had been taken. They were living in 2 incompatible and entirely self-contained fantasies. I doubt they even made it to the wedding day. Ex-wedding photographer here. There were only a couple situations where I had doubts about the couple's future, and one where I was certain. I met the couple in a cafe to discuss their ideas and my services. The bride was very happy and interested. The groom, however, was rolling his eyes and grunting at everything. I stopped trying to get him involved in the conversation after he ignored me twice. This made the bride very uncomfortable, and she was apologetic for his behavior. I don't know what happened to them, as they chose to reschedule their wedding and didn't hire me in the end. I declined to shoot a wedding when the person who was going to hire me was the groom's mom. When I asked her to arrange a meeting with the couple, she said that they didn't want a wedding, meaning they wanted to elope, and it was her initiative to celebrate it. I tried to play the "I want to hear the bride's idea" card, but she told me the bride has no ideas. She obeys the groom, and the groom obeys his mom. Therefore, I'll only talk to the mom. I declined. I hope the bride is fine. No one deserves a controlling mother-in-law. Finally, I was a guest and a photographer at my friend's wedding. The bridesmaid was wearing a short white dress, and she was chirping about how her boyfriend saw her in so many wedding dresses and how she caught 8 bouquets already. She talked a lot about wedding planning, but apparently there hadn't been a formal proposal. Her boyfriend, who was a guest as well, looked very annoyed and clearly wished he were somewhere else. Anyway, the bridesmaid started bugging me for photos of her and her boyfriend a week after the wedding. I told her several times that when I start editing the photos, I will do hers first, but by the time I sent her the photos, they were already broken up. She started dating someone else a month later, and they got married the next year. I'm a former wedding videographer. Sometimes we do letter reads. Basically, the bride writes a letter for the groom and vice versa. The couple reads their letter from their partner before the wedding. It tends to add good emotion since 9 times out of 10 the speeches suck. One bride said at the end of the letter read, which I quote, "Well, that was stupid." She just finished reading the groom's letter and was talking about what he had written. To be fair, what he wrote was not exactly Shakespeare, but still a harsh response. I cut that part out in the final video. Not a photographer, but a party bus driver for almost 5 years. Often we would do the bachelorette and the wedding party. Sometimes we'd get a combined bachelor and bachelorette party. Those are the worst. Why? Because 90% of the time it's the super controlling bride who doesn't want the groom out on his own with his boys. When I became the office manager, I really tried to discourage combined parties, as it seldom ended well. There would almost always be fighting and drama. Lastly, men, if your lady won't let you have a bachelor party but wants her own bachelorette, that's an enormous red flag. Trust me. I was shooting a friend's wedding years ago and witnessed a pretty serious red flag. To close the vows, the couple did a sand-mixing metaphor thing where the groom had a vial of white sand and the bride had a vial of black sand. They were to pour them into a tall, empty vial together to make gray sand, symbolizing their inseparable union. As they poured, they could not sync with each other at all. One would slow down, the other would speed up, and vice versa. They ended up pouring almost stratified black and white layers. He nervously giggled, and she looked forlorn as the pastor and guests marveled at their zebra-striped creation. Their marriage lasted about 2 years. I work for a company that does studio guest portraiture for extremely wealthy clients. Most of these clients are appearance-obsessed, so I've seen a lot of couples I don't think would last long. I remember this one couple where the groom's side were all hard drug dealers. They looked pretty scary, and the bride's side were all strippers. Fake bodies everywhere. The groom seemed to care less that it was his wedding, but the bride was the opposite. They had been together for 7 years and had 2 daughters, but from overhearing some of the speeches, the bride had practically begged the groom into getting married. She seemed happy, but he seemed so disinterested. I couldn't help but think that they wouldn't last long. I am a videographer. Most weddings we video are fairly smooth. The couple is happy, the family cries tears of joy, and there's lots of laughter. We did film one wedding that seemed fine up until the aisle walk. We video the bride and groom prep. They have 2 suites, one for the ladies and one for the gentlemen. My partner and I were having an easy time running back and forth. Everyone's drinking, and not light beer either. They're knocking back shots, and there were empty bottles everywhere. Everyone is pretty carefree and ready to party. The bride and groom most of all. This is going to be the easiest wedding we film, or so we thought. Everyone is seated in the ceremony hall. The groom and all his men are up front with the officiant. Bridesmaids start walking down the aisle, then the bride walks in with her father, all beautiful. At this point, I'm filming the groom and his reaction. We get a wide shot because we can always zoom in during post. My partner is recording the groom and her father. I see the best man in my viewfinder pull out a flask from his jacket pocket. The rest of the men do the same except the groom. This is clearly planned. Then, the best man speaks loud enough over the music, so people turn to him away from the bride. He raises his flask high and shouts, "Here's to the bride, here's to the groom. May you never disagree, but if you do..." He points to the bride with his flask and finishes, "F*** you, here's to the groom." They all drink to their frat boy toast. The best man hands the groom his flask and he drinks it while laughing. Jaws dropped. The bride and her father were speechless. The ceremony went on, but there's more. When the officiant asks the bride if she takes the groom as her husband, she weakly says, "I do." The officiant asks the same of the groom, and instead of just answering normally, he screams, "F*** yeah, I do." The bride just face-palms herself in embarrassment. The look of disgust on her whole family's faces the entire night was highly awkward to film. Needless to say, I think that's a big red flag. I was a wedding photographer. I think you can kind of tell if they are going to stay together based on how they handle all the little and sometimes even big problems a wedding day can bring. There was one couple's story I love to tell. They are not your typical bride and groom. They had their wedding in a forest, all vegan food, and a lot of friends with lots of dogs. Everything was perfect, except the special dress the bride had made and painted didn't arrive in time for the ceremony, and she was devastated. She was in her sweatpants and a Mickey Mouse t-shirt at the time, and her soon-to-be husband took off his suit, put on a big white shirt, stood there in his boxer shorts, and just said, "Well, we have to go," and she just laughed and went with it. I was in shock, but other than it being strange to have hairy man legs in my wedding photos, taking the pictures was really fun, and they were totally relaxed. I'm pretty sure they will be doing well. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to my channel for more Reddit stories. See you in the next video.